I'm Lance Dixon. I'm the director of the new Tropic. We're a local newsletter for anyone who's not familiar with us. Monday through Fridays show up in your inbox to kind of help you get the news to know that you need in Miami. I'm here with two folks who understand transit a lot better than I do, and so we're excited to hear from them about Transit Alliance Miami's Better Bus Project and the next steps on that, and kind of how we got here, and a lot more. So I'll let them introduce themselves, and if you all have any questions, I'll be right off screen looking at our Facebook feed, willing to answer those and let these guys know so they can get you some responses.
No, please ask questions, because by the time 6:15, 6:17 comes around, we're going to stop talking. So if there's no questions, we're going to have going back to the variety show format that we've been practicing so far. So my name is Az. I'm the director of Transit Alliance. I'm joined by Scudder Wag.
Good evening.
From Jared Walker and Associates. And the Better Bus Project basically aims to completely redesign the Miami-Dade County bus network from scratch, including 3 trolley systems: the City of Miami Beach, the City of Coral Gables, and the City of Miami. So it's the first time in the country that an advocacy organization is leading a bus system redesign. It's in partnership with the Miami-Dade Department of Transportation and Public Works and the trolley systems that I just mentioned. And Scudder and I, over the course of the next 5 days, we're going to go through some of the key aspects of what a bus system redesign is and what's involved with redesigning a bus system, and take your questions and talk about sort of where we are and what's next. So Scudder, without any further ado, do you want to talk a bit about like your role within this project, and I'll talk a bit about like Transit Alliance's role, and then we'll get straight into it?
Yeah, so I work for Jared Walker and Associates. We're a small bus network planning firm that does this kind of a study for cities all across the country. Houston, Richmond, Columbus, Anchorage, Dublin, Ireland. And our role as people who understand bus networks and understand the conversation is to help Miami, people here in Miami, have the conversation about what it is they want transit and their bus network to do for their city, for their county, for their region. And it's a conversation we've helped so many other communities have, and the conversation that we want to help you all have clearly so you understand your current system and you can understand what it means if you change it dramatically in different directions.
Yeah, and Transit Alliance, for those of you who don't know, like we're an advocacy organization focused on making public transit better in Miami. So we actually did a project last year called Where's My Bus, where we went into the issues that are plaguing the bus system right now, because the bus system has lost around 25 million riders in the past 4 years. And we recommended that a bus system redesign would be one of the solutions to help win back riders. And so after advocating for it, Miami-Dade County, through the Office of the Mayor, committed $250,000 to us. We fundraised $250,000, and then, long story short, now we're here and we're actually doing it. So during this short episode, we'll talk about like what exactly is a bus system redesign, and for that, we're going to bring up a little diagram that Scudder is going to explain just a little bit.
So this is a map of your existing bus network. And it's color-coded by the frequency of service, meaning how often a bus shows up in the middle of the day, which tells you what's kind of the worst you can expect to see pretty much from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. on a given weekday. Red means a bus is coming every 10 to 15 minutes or better in the middle of the day. Dark purple is every 20 minutes, blue is every 30 minutes, and then the light blue every 60 minutes. And we do that color coding because how long you wait for a bus tells you so much about how long it's going to take you to actually make a trip. Because for so many transit trips, the biggest part of your travel time is the actual wait time. The wait time for the bus to arrive, the wait time to transfer between buses. And even if you don't wait at the beginning of your trip because you have the wonderful real-time polling, real-time information, you're going to wait at the end of your trip. You know, if you are only on an hourly bus, because if your bus gets there to your job at 7:02 or 8:02, and you have to clock in at 8 a.m., you're going to get there at 7:02 and wait 58 minutes. So frequency is just the fundamental aspect of usefulness of transit, and that's why this map really helps you understand what your existing system is doing.
Right, and the map is of the entire county. I just want to show you that it goes all the way to the south and it goes all the way to the north and includes a few trolleys as well. And we're gonna focus only on this part just because it's a part that's easier to understand. So we're talking about like Miami Beach and downtown because it has the most frequent service right now. So do you want to talk about maybe the grid and what a frequent bus network grid could do, and also what is our current frequent system look like?
So a feature you'll see of a lot of the current bus system, kind of from 24th at the south up to 79th or even 135th at the north, and kind of from the airport to the island, is a grid of routes, spaced about every half a mile. And that grid is really powerful in a lot of ways, because that means to go from any point A to any point B along that grid, you start here, you get on the route, you wait, you go to another route, you transfer, and then you get to where you're going. Pretty much anywhere in that grid, it's a one transfer ride to get anywhere. And that works really well overall. The main problem with the usefulness, though, is because most of your grid is in blue, it means bus is only coming every 30 minutes. You have a long wait. You have a long wait for the bus to show up. You have a long wait to transfer, and that eats up a lot of time to get places. And what you really want to see in a grid is a lot of red. So, because a red grid like this means instead of an average 15-minute wait here to get on the bus and an average 15-minute wait to transfer, which you have with 30-minute routes, you have average of 7.5 minutes, average of 7.5 minutes. Your total waiting time for a one transfer trip is 15 minutes instead of 30 minutes.
So I think someone might ask, like from the outside, okay, fine, like why is frequency so important in a redesign? And it comes to this core question of like not only wait times, but also connectivity and making sure that you start from one place, the amount of places that you can get to. And I think that perfectly is a perfect segue into talking about this diagram here, which is an isochrome. So do you want to first explain like what exactly we're looking at? Because I mean, this could be the abstract art portion of our discussion here.
Or the Rorschach test.
Or the Rorschach test. Yeah. So this is the Little Havana one, just so you can see it. Go ahead and what are we looking at here?
You can think of this as a map of the wall around your life if you rely on transit to get anywhere.
Specifically in this case.
From Little Havana.
From Little Havana, yeah.
But we can do these diagrams, and we have example diagrams for lots of places around Miami-Dade. And what this is telling you is dark red is how far you can get in 30 minutes, the next lighter color is 45 minutes, and then the lightest pink is 60 minutes. How far you can get relying on transit, walking to the bus, waiting for the bus, riding the bus, transferring, and so on. And what that's really telling you is this is as far as you can reach in 60 minutes, which is, the most amount of time that an average person would really want to spend commuting one way every day. Round trip, that's 2 hours of your life every day. So this is a map of your physical freedom and opportunity if you rely on transit from this location.
And generally during the course of a bus network redesign, and you guys are particularly good at this, is that how these blobs change are the fundamental basis for what a system redesign sort of can achieve.
Exactly. So what you look at, number one, some of the things you see in the diagram is from here you can get all the way up to here because you ride up and you transfer and you get across in that grid. If the grid of routes is more frequent, the wait time is less, you could get farther out or farther this way. Oops, there we go.
All the way there.
And ultimately, you save the waiting time, means you can get farther in 60 minutes or 45 minutes with more frequent service in those busy, dense, active places in the region where those grid of routes serves. And that you expand the freedom and opportunity to get to jobs, to get to other people, to get to destinations. That is the foundation of the usefulness of transit to most people.
So I want to sort of bring this full circle and skip back to the network map and talk a little bit about why does Miami need to do this to begin with? Why?
Well, every city, every region, every community, transit system kind of evolves slowly over time. Every year, every 2 years, the transit agency, the community, makes a few changes here, makes a few changes there, kind of incrementally grows and develops, kind of like a coral reef. you know, just slowly accreting change.
It's a weird comparison because coral reefs just aren't doing very well, and also bus systems nationally aren't doing very well. I don't know if you're trying to make that.
Perhaps. But ultimately, that kind of incremental change over time doesn't give you the opportunity to go back and reassess, has this network that's evolved through this accretion of small changes, is it really serving the city of today? Because so many things change over a 20 or 30 year time span that, you know, big changes in the overall pattern of the city and the region mean maybe the whole thing just needs to be rethought from the baseline. And, you know, also so many routes pick up little deviations and changes over the years because, you know, so-and-so called up their commissioner or their council member and said, I need this route to go here. And then 10 years later, that company or that person's moved and nobody's decided to change the route back.
Yeah.
So this kind of wipe the slate clean, let's relook at the whole system and design it for the city, the region, the county today, gives you an opportunity to reassess everything at once.
And I think also a lot of people in Miami are sort of very frustrated with the usability of transit. And a lot of people, I think, are in the mindset of like, let's build rail, let's build gondolas, let's build BRT. But I think we've had this history of not doing anything to the point whereas we have a bus system that essentially is essentially shedding ridership to the degree that it's one of the steepest ridership drops in the country.
Yeah, and one of the, I think, big reasons for that is, one, because the frequency of so much of the service is just below that kind of 15-minute threshold where things become kind of so useful that you don't even think about a schedule.
Right.
And many years ago, many of these routes were probably closer to that 15-minute threshold. You know, a big trend is in the last 10 to 15 years, service has been cut overall, bus service, by 20% or so. And a lot of that has come out of the frequency of service on a lot of these routes in the core and the densest places, and that just means the service is so much less useful to so many people. So many people can get so many fewer places than they used to be able to that they've decided, I'm not going to bother with this anymore. And that's a completely understandable reaction. And so a rethinking of the network around the question of how should we invest our resources? Should we invest more in those really, really useful grid or frequent routes that are going to get a lot of people to a lot of places quickly, relative to, you know, sending routes all the way out to the very edge of the developed area where, you know, things may not be as dense and may not be as many people, and therefore you're just not serving as many trips and being as productive as you could be, is kind of one of the central questions of what should Miami-Dade be trying to do with its bus system. And that is ultimately a value question that I can't tell you what you should do.
Yeah, and also it's a values question that is sort of, we're working through, and we'll talk about the survey tomorrow, but also just so that everyone knows, like, this process isn't happening in the dark. Like, just to be clear, everything that you see here, this is the current system. And we'll talk through the course of these 5 days, like what happens next and what the process is going to be like. But just so you know where we are, all of the diagrams that you're seeing now, by the end of the week, or sometime around the end of the week, early next, we'll release a report that not only has this diagram, it has a lot of other fun diagrams about essentially things that you've been studying about the system, that maybe through the week we'll get through some of the things. And also sort of our base plate of where the system is now and a base for where it could go and what the major issues are.
Yeah, so that report will have a lot more detail and ask some of these kind of critical value questions about what the community wants transit to try to do, and raise some other, you know, key issues and questions about what you know, little things over the years that have kind of accreted odd deviations and so on. And of course the other key thing is that the last 10 to 15 years, the trolley networks have exploded across, and just in the last few years have trolleys and Miami-Dade Transit really started to cooperate and find what's the right balance of roles. And this process is an opportunity for particularly the city of Miami, Miami Beach, and Coral Gables to really understand that process and their roles.
So I want to get to any questions, if we have any questions. Otherwise, we go straight back to the variety show.
No, we do have a couple. There was one thing I just think it'd be useful, I guess, to clarify for folks is you mentioned BRT. Could you just briefly talk about what that is?
Yeah.
What that acronym is?
So BRT stands for Bus Rapid Transit, but I think it's fair to say that by now it can mean a few different things. So like pure, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're actually the expert. You can just
go ahead.
You can just push me aside and be like, oh, you just don't know. Like real true BRT involves all sorts of elements. Like one, the bus has a dedicated right of way, which means it has its own dedicated lane. The stations are more like train stations, so there's level boarding, so you essentially are getting onto the bus at the same level. The fare is collected off board, which means you pay for your fare before you get on the bus. Miami-Dade does not have any true bus rapid transit systems. The only thing that we have that comes close to this is the South Dade Busway, which has a dedicated lane for the buses, but none of the other elements that I talked about.
Yeah, I mean, BRT is kind of a range of things that you can do. Dedicated lanes, you know, large stations, generally wider spacing, there's a wide range of possibilities beyond that you can do. There's international standards for doing, off-board fare collection,
yeah,
the
like
frequency
like
level.
BRT Gold and
So another key feature of most high-quality BRT systems, or very useful ones, is what I would say, are also high-frequency service. So dedicated lane with service every 10 minutes, or every 7 minutes, or better.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a question from Jeffrey. He asked, why is it not possible to have more frequent buses everywhere without negatively affecting areas by taking their few buses away and moving them to more populated areas? So I guess it's essentially like how you
that's a great question.
spread out resources.
That's a great question, and we'll talk about that trade-off in more detail tomorrow. But this network redesign is cost neutral, which means that there's no additional resources being allocated. Is that the best thing to do? Absolutely not. More resources for transit means more transit. But this bus system redesign exists within a cost neutral scenario. That's not something that I decided, that's not something that Scudder decided.
Right.
That's just the politics and the budget of Miami-Dade County. So essentially what that means is that because it's cost neutral, the only way to create more frequent service is you have to get that hours from somewhere else, essentially. And that key trade-off is not, again, it's not happening in isolation. It's not me or Scudder deciding that. We'll talk about the survey tomorrow that goes into a lot more detail about how exactly we're going to decide what this trade-off should be. Because there's no right, I think the key point is that there's no right answer.
There's no wrong answer.
There's no wrong answer, but the key part is if we want a system that builds ridership, there is an answer for that.
Yeah, ultimately if you want higher ridership, there's an implied part to that, which is if you want higher ridership per dollar spent per hour of bus service on the street. If you want just more riders in general, you can always, do some of that by just putting more service on the street and spending more dollars. But as I said, we've been tasked with looking at a redesign that's cost neutral. The question about how much you invest is an important question. It's a question we have explored in other cities because they've wanted to think about what they could do with more investment.
Yeah.
And that is, as with the value question about how you invest the dollars you do have in higher frequency or in more coverage, which we'll talk more about tomorrow. The question of how much you invest is also a value question, a political question, about how much your community wants to put into service.
And just to be clear, TransAlliance's first campaign was actually to restore cuts to the budget system. So we love more money for transit, but at the same time, we are in a situation where we're shedding so many riders, and we have to do something drastic in order to fix what's really broken. And that comes with the rather strong sense of immediacy.
Good question.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
We also have another question here from Gloria. She asks, what has been the ridership drop on the bus system in the past? So what's, I guess, sort of the trend line you all have seen in the work that you've done?
Yeah. I think we were at around 78 million boardings in 2013, and as of 2018, and these are fiscal years counting, but don't worry about it, just think about it as a year. So 78 million means 78 million people tapping their cards or paying cash. It's boardings, someone getting on the bus. We were at that in 2013, and as of 2018, we're about 52 So do the math. That's more than 25. It's like,
a pretty big drop, and that's on Miami-Dade Transit.
That's on Miami-Dade Transit. Some of that has gone to the trolleys, which I think is just around 12. Last time I checked, 12 million, but probably is more by the time the recent financial year ends.
Mm-hmm.
So some of that has gone to the trolleys, but not all of it. Like as an entire system,
as a whole, you've still lost 15% or more over the last 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
So a pretty significant drop, and that is that's a similar pattern you've seen in a lot of other cities around the country. Los Angeles, New York City, a lot of Washington D.C., where I am based, has seen a significant decline in bus ridership. The only places that have actually seen increases in their bus ridership over the last 3 to 4 years have been places that have redesigned their bus networks.
Yeah.
Houston, Columbus, Richmond, and we feel like those have generally been network designs and redesigns that have provided more useful service to more people.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. I have another question more specifically about neighborhood from Gabriel. He asks, how would you guys fix the gap between the West Kendall area? So essentially, he's noticing that there are routes that connect. There's an idea to connect routes to terminals like the West Kendall terminal and access colleges and universities and things like that. But he's saying that he has to wait about an hour for a bus to come and then transfer just to get to Kendall Drive, which is like a major thoroughfare. So, what are the ideas, I guess, for a neighborhood like that?
So I'd say I can't answer that question in detail right now. Sure. But as we go further in this redesign process,
we should explain why we can't answer that.
Well, we can, yes.
Because the altitude that we're at now, and I think it's important to emphasize because we do receive a lot of specific area questions, is that we are thinking about the entire system as a whole right now. That's not to say that the West Kendall problem won't be examined and there won't be two concepts. And we'll talk about that a bit more during the week, but basically when we release concepts of, hey, this is what the network could look like, that's the stage at which we can talk about, hey, okay, fine, this is what West Kendall's impacts would be based on the two different directions. That's not to say that there already hasn't been a lot of data analysis into what's going on, but it would be unfair. We would be lying if we said this is what's going to happen in this is what's going to be happening in West Kendall.
You can't say what's going to happen in West Kendall
but
today,
I think,
for a little while.
Should we talk about activity density just a tad for a minute? Because that actually is sort of relevant to the conversation. So I know this map may be a little harder to see, and we'll post these up on our website by the end of the week, but there are all sorts of colors here. And just very briefly, Scudder, what does this map mean?
So activity density is the total number of people and the total number of jobs divided by the area that they're in. So the total, you can think of it as 100 people and jobs per acre, for example, in one space.
But basically that sums up to how active
the place is, because in transit you're not just concerned about how many people reside there, you're also concerned about how many jobs are there, because people are going to places to work places. They're also going to places where there are a lot of jobs, because that's where you have stores, that's where you have medical centers where people are going for appointments and visits and whatnot. So together they represent kind of the basis of the level of demand you can expect for transit. And you see a pattern. This is darker colors, darker yellows are high density of primarily jobs. Darker blues are higher density of primarily residents, and then the combination of red is high density of both together.
Yeah. So let's look at a few examples. Let's look at Miami Beach as an example.
Miami Beach and downtown Miami are very high density, relatively for the region. Obviously, you have a lot of towers with a lot of jobs and a lot of people.
Yeah.
So very high dark red. But even into say Little Havana, you also have relatively high density in that part of the city of Miami. You also see some relatively high density down in Coral Gables, on out to Sweetwater and Florida International.
And what would you like to use as maybe a contrasting example?
Well, you look north of there into say Doral. You have some areas of relatively high job density, but not combined jobs and people. So one of the challenges that you face in that kind of a situation is there's a lot of demand coming in the morning and then going out in the afternoon. But what that means is you're running buses both ways, so the bus coming back out in the morning is empty.
Yeah.
And
which costs a lot.
Yeah. So that everyone who's riding into there in a full bus feels like, oh my gosh, it's bus is full,
Yeah.
but they're not seeing the return trip in the morning that's empty.
Yeah.
So when you have concentrations of just jobs over a large area, obviously there's still some significant demand, but it's kind of all one way.
Yeah. And the opposite happens too.
And the opposite happens when it's
we have
all
areas
residential.
down south where that have
Yeah.
some largely residential.
And then ultimately, the lower the overall level of density, just the lower level of demand.
Yeah.
Density drives transit demand.
Yeah.
That is the number one sign of potential for ridership.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So we have, I guess, like one more that we can get in here from Steven. He's asking, basically he mentioned that a big part of the bus problem, and you all talk about this a little bit, is about on-time arrival. And I know that's been a big kind of touch point for you all. So, and that's largely caused by congestion. So he's asking, how you all are attempting to or intending to address that part of the issue.
You did some great work on time arrivals that we'll release, in the reports, right?
Yeah. So our report has a summary of how our current routes and how's the system overall doing on-time performance, and specifically what we call schedule adherence. How closely are you arriving at the stop when you say you're going to? And that's an enormous challenge for any bus agency to meet. 70%, 80% schedule adherence might be as best as you can do when you're working in mixed traffic in congested conditions. And fixing that requires not just the transit agency, but the city, the county, the state, all to work together to fix those problems, which may mean needing dedicated lanes in places, may mean a whole range of technological solutions to work coordinate with traffic signals and so on. That's not something we can solve in moving around bus service between routes, but it is something we're talking about.
But also there is a relationship between the impacts of on-time performance and frequency for the transit rider. Like if you are waiting for a route that is every 15 minutes and it's late, 17, 20, the impacts of that are relatively mild compared to a bus route that's running every 60 minutes that's running 10, 15 minutes late.
Well, and ultimately frequency is also for all the things it does in terms of reducing your waiting time when the bus is arriving and reducing your waiting time when you're transferring. It's also a basic backstop for reliability. If you're waiting on a bus that comes every 10 or 15 minutes and that bus happens to break down, the next bus is coming pretty soon.
Yeah.
If you're waiting on that for a bus that comes every 40 minutes, you're going to have a really long wait if the bus pulls up and it breaks down in front of you.
Yeah.
So it's also a backstop for reliability in that way. But the whole challenge of on-time performance is something that's a little bigger than what we can solve in thinking about a network redesign. But it is something that is certainly interwoven into the whole conversation about this network redesign for longer-term planning about what to do for the city, the county, and the region.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else, Lance? We're good? Cool. Thank you so much for joining us. Day one.
Thank you.
Come back for day two tomorrow. Who knows what other... Well, tomorrow we actually have a special guest, and that'll be a surprise. So come back tomorrow. We'll talk about some of the things we actually talked about today, but mainly like the ridership coverage trade-off and what that means and how you can get involved in helping decide what that is. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So thanks so much for coming. Thank you, Scudder, for staying late. For staying late, coming down, and
See you all tomorrow, right?
yeah, see you tomorrow.